Good evening, everybody. Welcome to Midlands Arts Centre. My name is Jessica Litherland. I'm the visual arts producer here at MAC, and I'm very excited to welcome Sarah Corbett and Lucy Siegle here this evening to celebrate the launch of Sarah's fantastic new book, How to Be A Craftivist, as demonstrated by Sarah. I'm going to tell you a little bit about Sarah and Lucy to start with. Sarah Corbett is an award-winning campaigner. She grew up in a low-income area of the UK into an activist family and has worked as a professional campaigner for a decade, most recently with Oxfam, Great Britain. She set up the global and award-winning Craftivist Collective in 2009, providing products and services to do craftivism using her gentle protest approach, which I'm sure we're going to hear a lot about this evening. She works with arts institutions, the charity sector, and academia, as well as unexpected collaborations, such as with organisations Tatty Divine and Secret Cinema, and regularly gives talks around the world. Jealous. Her book, A Little Book of Craftivism, was released in October 2013 and is on its second print run. And obviously her new book, How to Be a Craftivist, The Art of Gentle Protest, is why we're all here this evening. On to Lucy. Lucy Siegle is an environmental journalist and broadcaster. In her written work, she specialises in environmental and social justice issues and ethical consumerism, and is devoted to widening their appeal. She joined The Observer, the world's oldest Sunday newspaper, in 2000, became a columnist in 2004, and created the paper's Observer Ethical Awards, which are dubbed the Green Oscars. A familiar face on primetime TV, Lucy has worked across channels on different formats, as well as having a long-standing connection to The One Show on BBC One. We know. Lucy's book on the fashion industry and the need for reform to die for, Is Fashion Wearing Out the World, has been credited as the essential text for anybody interested in the fashion industry and its future, which I completely agree with. Absolutely. So the format for the evening, Sarah and Lucy are going to have a bit of a chat, and then we're going to open it up to some questions. So you might have come with some questions, or something might come up. So just remember it as we're going along, and there'll be plenty of opportunity at the end to ask some questions. I just wanted to give you a little bit of context about why we're here this evening. This all was kick-started by an exhibition we currently have in our first floor gallery by an artist called Sally Payen. The exhibition's called The Fence and the Shadow, curated by Mandy Fowler. It's all about the Greenham Common women's protests of the 1980s and 1990s. And there's a really interesting craftivist link with Greenham Common, because the women who were protesting there were using craft as a method of protest before the term craftivism was coined. So knitting and crocheting and other methods of craft were used by the women at Greenham. We've been curating a women and protest season around Sally's exhibition, and we're really excited to be able to include Sarah in these events, the lead craftivist in the UK. We'd like to just mention the upcoming events on the Women in Protest season. We've got some really exciting things coming up. We've got Carry Greenham Home, which is a film that's coming up soon, and we've got some women who were at Greenham who are going to be doing a Q&A. And we've also got an amazing seminar day, some interesting theatre. So there's a lot going on. If you pick up a highlights brochure, you'll be able to see what we've got coming up. And at this point, I'd like to really thank the Saintbury Trust for supporting all of the Women in Protest events. Sarah's going to be signing some books afterwards. We've only got a few copies here this evening, so it'll have to be on a first-come, first-served basis. But if anyone does miss out, I can order some copies in afterwards, and we can get them to you. So just let me know. And without further ado, I'll hand you over to Sarah and Lucy. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thanks, Jess. Thank you for that intro, and thanks for coming tonight. It's lovely to have such a fabulous turnout on a Saturday night.
I know.
Isn't it
so
great?
Rock and roll, people.
Yeah, look at us, look at us. I'd only be watching Casualties, so is that on a Saturday? Yes. Okay, well, I do hope that you've got lots of questions, or will have lots of questions as we go through. We're going to talk for a little bit first, but if you're really, really like bursting to join in the conversation, just, shout out. Don't stand on your chair, actually, because they're upholstered. That would be bad form. Or just attract our attention, and you can be involved in the conversation. We'd love that. I don't know. Yes. I think we've got a microphone, though, haven't we? So we would need to get a microphone to you at some point. But anyway, we'll sort it out as we go along. It's not a problem. We can accommodate it. So I'm very excited to be here. tonight because I have admired Sarah's work for quite a long time, actually.
Ditto, kiddo.
Yes, well, I've been around for ages, but you were a sort of fresh face on the scene and bringing something incredibly new to the world of social and environmental justice as far as I was concerned. So I think that I feel like I connected with your work from the first time that I heard about it. So for me, and I think there is a quote from me on the back of this book, so I'm not an impartial judge, let's put it that way, but I do think that this is in essence a manifesto, but is incredibly smart in the way that you have framed activism of all different types. So I think, even for people who can't see themselves actually making something physically, I think there is so much to be got from this book, and a confidence as well, which we'll talk about as we go through. And I kind of want to start at the beginning, really, with page 4. Because on page 4, you use Betsy Greer's definition. So Betsy Greer, you said, coined the term activism. And the definition that you found, or you come across, it makes your voice stronger or compassion deeper, or compassion deeper. So I wanted to talk about those two elements. So why did that chime for you? Why did you need your voice to be stronger? And your compassion deeper, because you seem very compassionate anyway. And I'd also kind of like to understand why those two elements are so important. What happens if we just make our voices stronger without the kind of internal compassion? Does that mean that these things don't last, or that you burn out, or whatever? So I wondered if we could start from that point.
Yeah, I mean, I Googled craft and activism once I started doing some craft on a train and realising that it slowed me down and it helped calm me down and think deeply about my activism. So I thought, hang on a minute, I think these two things could actually really work together. And the word existed. And I Googled it in 2008 and the word was coined in 2003. So I looked up the website and she's got a short definition and a longer one. And for me, I read that and thought, yeah, I agree with that. And I think the fact that it says stronger rather than louder, for me, was really important, because strong doesn't have to mean loud.
And you define yourself as an introvert.
I am an introvert, love. I'm not lying. Everyone thinks I'm lying, but I'm not.
You see, I say I'm an introvert as well, and everyone always says, no, you're not. And I believe I am.
Yeah, so it's different to shyness. Often they're hand in hand, but often they're not. It's where you get your energy. So I like one-to-ones, and I like being on my own a lot, but being around lots of people all the time. My sister's an extreme extrovert, so she has to be around people all the time for energy. It drains me a little bit. So I loved the anger, the voice being stronger rather than louder.
Did you previous to all your work on craftivism and discovering this channel, if you like, did you feel overlooked? Did you feel that your voice wasn't heard? Did you feel sort of under pressure? You knew you wanted to be an activist because you've had like this real kind of burning sense of injustice and needing to do something since you were quite young. Yeah. Did you feel like you needed to break through and sort of like, oh, if I don't like shouting in public, I'm never going to be able to do it?
Yeah, the more activism I did, and I moved to London for a job with a charity, and I started joining lots of activist groups, and quickly just, sounds really emo, but I didn't fit in. Like, I joined one group and they all cycled everywhere, and I'm scared of cycling in London.
Yeah, that wouldn't work.
So they would cycle off somewhere, and I'd be like, I'm getting the bus, I'll see you in a bit. Lots were vegan, which I wasn't vegan. So that was very black and white. I love fashion, which is why I heard a lot about your work and love what you do. And I love reading Vogue every month, and it's problematic like everything, but it's my guilty pleasure every month. And if I held it under my arm in some meetings, people were like, you're not allowed to like fashion because it's all wrong. You need to be wearing a sack of hemp.
And you wear lipstick as well.
And I wear lipstick. And so there was lots of groups that I didn't fit in. And being an introvert, I noticed I was burning out much quicker than other people who were gaining energy from going on marches. I found it far too much stimulus. I'm a bit hypersensitive as well, which often introverts can be, where it's too much stimulus. So I was very aware that it didn't come naturally. It was exhausting, which lots of activism is, but it wasn't sustainable. But the main thing for me was it just didn't, my gut feeling was this is not me being a kind person. And in every part of life, if you want to try and engage someone in an issue, you don't scream at them and demonize them and bully them into changing their hearts and minds, because it doesn't make sense. Yet in activism, that was always the strategy. Get as many people out to scream at people. Get as many petitions to tell them what to do and treat them like a robot or an object. And my gut feeling was, this does not seem like, you know, I talk about if we want the world to be beautiful, kind and just, then for me, it did not make any sense that our activism, a lot of it, was angry, unkind and not just. It was unjust. It was unfair to say it's all your fault and I'm not part of the problem at all. You know, it didn't seem right.
So there was a sort of authenticity battle as well, because yeah, it didn't seem fair, and also at the same time we're all quite complex and we all hold lots of different maybe kind of oxymoronic things in our lives. You might like Vogue and you might hate advertising and what the fashion industry does, but it doesn't stop you kind of sneaking a peek at the Kardashians' Instagram.
Sometimes.
For some people might say I wouldn't possibly...
I don't follow them though. I don't.
No, I don't either actually, but I do look at them sometimes. Anyway, that's my revelation. So disclosures are fine, by the way, this evening.
You can tweet all of this right now. You're allowed.
Don't you dare. So where do you think activism is now? Not your own activism, but the general state of activism, because you describe quite an unhealthy situation there.
So I think the last 2 years, so last year when Trump, we didn't think would get as far as he did with the elections. In the UK, we had Brexit. Lots of stuff happened around the world that for a lot of us was a massive shock to the system. And we thought we knew what everyone was thinking, and we presumed everyone wanted to vote a particular way and didn't. And that shook up a lot of people. And I saw it with my work, people suddenly, more followers, more tweets of people going, what are you doing? What are we doing? We've got to be more, people wanting to be more politicized than ever before. I've been doing this for nearly 10 years and being an activist for a long time. And activism was never cool. It was very much, I talk in the book about how I'd go to, you know, a nice house party of a friends. And at the time, I was working for Oxfam as an activism manager. That was my job title. So when people said, what did you do? I was like, I'm an activism manager. And literally people would just be like, and go, I've just got to go to the toilet, or lovely to meet you. And you could see them thinking, she's going to judge me, she's going to talk about social justice, and all I want to do is dance to Beyonce, which is all I wanted to do. But there was this real, like, activism is a particular tribe that you either are in or you're not. Whereas now, you look everywhere, and activism is a bit cool, which it hasn't been for many years. So you've got lots of fashion brands that have black berets on and sashes saying revolution. They're not saying what their revolution is, which is very clever of them. But there's a real want for millennials, especially to feel that they can shape the world. But there's also activism's definitely, you know, a lot of celebrities now in their Twitter handle say actor, something, activist. There's a lot out there, which is great in lots of ways because it's fertile ground to say, yeah, okay, let's challenge stuff. But my worry is that a lot of it is also marketed to sell people stuff and is a bit of good washing, a bit like years ago. I remember learning from you, Lucy, not that you're that old, but years ago when you talked about greenwashing, and now we've got greenwashing, but also we've got this good washing a lot more than we ever had. So it's interesting times.
Yes, and I think it's only right that we talk about some of the most egregious examples of good washing.
Yes, please.
Yeah, and also it's just fun to bitch about them, frankly. But there are some really terrible ones. And I think what particularly annoys me, sorry, I didn't mean to be so negative so early, like 8 minutes in, but here we go. So what annoys me are those kind of ideas. Like we had some really brilliant advertising campaigns, like Run Like a Girl. Did you see that one? So they would ask, you know, young people to run like a girl, or all people, and the old people would do a funny pastiche, and then really young people wouldn't really know what that meant, which was great. But then you kind of get this idea that you can just show a young woman a picture of an old woman who's achieved something, And there will be, like, by osmosis, this empowerment that will happen without any of the infrastructure. We don't need equal pay. Just show her a picture.
Yeah.
And that really irritates me.
Massively irritates me.
Yes.
And a lot of brands who are like, look, we have models that are older now with grey hair. And you think, well, that's great in lots of ways. But also, how are your clothes made? You're still, if anything, getting more unethical because you're growing so fast and you can't measure your processes. So I do worry that I love the fact that people want to be more engaged in politics and are. But at the same time, I also worry that all of us can get caught up with, oh, that brand must be good because they're showing an older person in an outfit, and isn't that great? And I think they're getting cleverer and cleverer at that balance for them of needing for their shareholders or whoever to make lots of profit, but knowing that audiences now care more about where things are made, how they're made. So instead of changing their processes, which is what I want and what you want, they just buffering up what they've done and making it sound like it's social change when it's not. And I think some activism is that as well, is saying, I really care about an issue, but they're not actually acting on what you want to change. So by saying, I really care about something, everyone's like, well done you for saying you care. Whereas my feeling is, all right, but what are we asking? Who are we asking to change a process or a policy or a culture or a behaviour? Who's the person in power that makes that change? What are you going to do personally? Are you going to change your energy supply? Or are you just going to have a picture in a field saying that you love flowers?
We'll talk a little bit more about those things that just proclaim. It's the kind of eco or social justice version of keep calm and carry on.
Yeah.
Which you have on a mug and a biscuit tin. So, yeah, we do have to be aware of that. So what's kind of interesting to me is, well, a couple of points I wanted to make. First of all, I think that there's also something going on, and I've been told this by the few female CEOs that there are. Yeah. So Rose Marco, who runs Patagonia, which is an outdoor brand. I don't know if you've ever met Rose, but she's great. She's really funny as well. She said that she talks in a lot of colleges, and a lot of young women come up to her after she's spoken at length about how the whole system needs to change and say, you know, how did you get to where you are now? Like they want a roadmap.
Yeah, and a quick one.
A quick roadmap, yeah. And she sort of patiently explains, well, it doesn't matter how I got here because the route will be different for you.
Completely different.
Yeah, and there isn't just a map. But I think, like, if that ever happens in the future to me, I will just be able to give people this book because...
I didn't tell her to say that, I promise.
But it's a very useful thing because it's not a roadmap, because there is no roadmap. It's not a blueprint. But what it does is help you navigate and actually spell out the things that you probably are going to have to do, which I think is incredibly useful. Is that what you kind of intended?
I hate writing, unlike you as a writer.
No, I hate writing,
You're
believe
a columnist.
Me. Yeah, it's awful. It's like, you know... very, very difficult.
I hate it. And I do a lot of workshops and talks, and I've got a lot going on in my head. And there's a few people that came to my workshops today, and people afterwards would often say, have you written this down anywhere? You said all of this stuff. Have you got any references? And I didn't blog any of it because I don't like writing, and I'm scared of writing in case it's not good. And you need a lot of time to do it, and I whiz around a lot. But again, craftivism was becoming more popular. So I wrote this last year, but the year before it was getting more popular. And I thought, and what we were talking about with activism becoming more popular, but activism, I was worried that was being used, this person is an activist because they donate secondhand clothes to refugees in Cairo or wherever. And I thought, that's not activism, that's donation. And when working in the charity sector, we're very clear of, you've got donation and fundraising, and you've got an emergency relief, and you've got activism. So you need to do the emergency stuff, but unless you're looking at what are the root causes and trying to change them from the beginning, you're not going to be able to fix the system. So it was a mix of me worrying that the word activism wasn't understood of what it meant, and that people were co-opting it, and also that craft and craftivism was getting more popular and people wanting to know what was in my head and me not writing it down, which wasn't good. That I thought, this is the right time to dump it all, do a brain dump.
You're making it sound like you've just dumped a load of words, which you haven't, because it's very
didn't.
beautifully written, and I'm going to ask you to read a little bit in a minute, because I think it's really beautifully written. And just on the idea of writing, if there's anyone here who's got a book in them and doesn't think that they can do it, the art of writing is attaching one's bottom to the chair.
Yes.
I think Mark Twain said that. It is so true. Just sit down and write it. Just sit down.
It didn't get easier. Every day I was like, ugh.
Yeah, and you end up, you have a really clean kitchen for ages, a really clean fridge, and yeah. But I've been there like every week. Yes. Anyway, would you read us a little bit, because one of your favourite passages, if you could pick something to read.
So I'm picking from a chapter called Graceful Activism, and it's just a little summary, really, that I thought gives a good overview. It's a little bit of a rant, but a positive rant. So it's got a little heading called Culture of Power. I haven't read this for over a year, so bear with me in case there's a shadow. So, Culture of Power. If we define power as the ability to get the job done, then grace in action looks logical or even bonkers. If we live in a culture where our default seems to be that the way we get stuff done is to do it ourselves, to gain power, we need to take it away from others. Power is seen as a way to control people or change people's actions by force. Aggressive abuse is used to attempt to change situations and topple opponents. We often see in politics and in our personal lives too. How many of us resort to manipulation to try to get people to do what we want them to do? How many of us sink to abuse when others will not be? Many of us sink to abuse when others will not be the way we want them to be. I still see images in the media of graffiti, of activists throwing eggs at politicians and business leaders, and messages naming and shaming people, people shouting, belittling or ridiculing others, giant, disrespectful effigies of people in positions of power being taken on marches. We live in a culture where we are regularly told all politicians are corrupt. Police are pigs. Chief executives are fat cats. I can understand the anger towards these people, but they're still people. These labels and actions create bigger divisions, making it harder to work together or even listen to each other. It fuels a culture of distrust, dehumanizes people, and splinters society into dangerous silos. Hate breeding hate, exactly what we don't want. If we turn the idea of power upside down, turned it away from the desire to control others by force, and encouraged those in power to try to always use their influence in the most possible, loving way. What if we did that? Let's be subversive craftivists and not add to the cynicism we sadly often see in activism. Let's look at the bigger picture. Instead of hating our enemies, let's show them love. Instead of brashly asserting and promoting ourselves and our agenda, let's quietly get on with the work of justice on behalf of others. Instead of trying to win every argument through sheer force of number or names on a petition or bullying an opponent, let's gently encourage them to sometimes being prepared to lose the argument. Instead of competing to take their power, let's empower them to use their power well. Instead of fighting to punish people, let's fight to change the system and structure. Instead of creating battlefields, let's build bridges. Let's find our common values and connections, especially where there is threat of conflict. Let's show belief and trust in the face of disbelief and mistrust. Let's admit that we don't have all the answers, recognize our own flaws, and help others quietly to do the best job they can without looking for praise. Let's aspire for a collective society, not an individualistic and competitive one. Let's strive to do no harm and be honest with each other about how complex and difficult that can be within any organisation or group. We need to govern ourselves by a thoughtful conscience, not by the status quo. Craftivists should be curious, creative, and courageous. Our graciousness might seem weak, passive, or naive, but it's far from it.
Lovely.
Not very good at reading my own book.
Very, very good. It's very hard to do, actually. I thought you read it really well. Let's just pick up on a couple of things from that. And another story that's in the book, actually. Not everybody immediately shares your resolve or a belief in the power of gentle protest. So there is a story in the book. Let's talk about Jessica. I'm assuming it's not the same Jessica that runs this arts venue, because we wouldn't be here tonight.
It's a Swedish lady.
A Swedish lady. And she was quite angry with you for not being more angry.
Oh, yeah, and I get that a lot. Less so now. No, I got it a lot at the beginning, and then less so, and then the last couple of years, people are more angry, so I'm getting it a bit more again.
So it's a sort of wave, it peaks and troughs. Yeah. So what's that about?
Yeah, so I had an exhibition in Stockholm, in Sweden, a couple of years ago, and I did a talk with a Swedish journalist. And she sat on the front, and I'm quite a sensitive being, and she sat there with her very large cross-stitched banner and came on her own and sat there and just looked at me the whole time. She was closer than you are, and scared the bleep out of me, really. I just thought, oh, is this woman? And she had multicoloured hair and tattoos, and I've got tattoos and did have multicoloured hair, but she had this presence there, and she even says herself, she was quite like, okay, impress me. Mm-hmm. And you could see the whole way through the talk, she was like, not so sure. And afterwards, I spoke to her because I wanted some water, and I was standing next to her. She wanted water, so I said, oh, what are you stitching? What's your giant banner? And she was like, well, there's lots of... there was a rise in a racist group in Stockholm, and you think Sweden so liberal, but there was these pockets of racism. So she wanted to make this big banner to put in a square where they often met to say, what you're doing is just awful. You know, we are Swedish. What are you doing? This is not what we do. And was really angry with them. So I challenged her and said, okay, what are you writing? And it was a very strong statement. So I said, okay, what are you hoping to get out of it? Which is what I do on Twitter a lot as well. What do you hope to get out of what you've just tweeted me? And she said, I don't know, I just need to get it out there. I just need to say stuff. And she was very angry, and she looked tired as well. And I said, okay, but are they going to listen? Because what you really wanted to is engage them. So how are you going to engage them where you might get them to think differently? And she basically was like, what you're doing, I think, is weak, and we need to be big. We need to do big stuff. We need to be angry. We shouldn't let this happen.
So she agreed with you in the format. So the
Yes.
craftivism was the bit that she got. The craft she'd got.
The craft,
but she wanted to make a really overt message, and she was accusing a particular political party of being racist.
Yeah.
Right.
So it was very big. The messaging was very bold and strong and quite violent language and negative. So I was challenged on that, but she challenged me, saying, what you're doing, it's too positive. We need to challenge these people and say, how dare you do what you're doing? So I said, okay, but I don't think they're going to listen. And you do not look happy, or you're looking exhausted. And, you know, are you all right? And she basically sort of then melted and was like, I've got a young daughter. I just don't want to live in this world that we're in, and I need to do something because I don't want her living in it. So she came along to my next work. I said, come to the next workshop, see if you like it. More than happy to discuss the strengths and the weaknesses, but you also need to be healthy in what you're doing. And my passion is to be effective activists, and I don't know how effective it is to just scream at people. So she came to a workshop and she got it, and she was really good. She listened hard. She asked me lots of questions. She saw that not only could it create respectful conversations with people and plant seeds in people's minds rather than screaming at each other where we close off in fight or flight. And she also, as a mum, said that she was worried in the workshop. She said she was worried that her daughter saw her as a bully, and the last thing she wanted was her daughter seeing her mother as bullying these other people and being a quite violent human being. So she saw all of the benefits, and now she's a massive craftivist and does loads of stuff. Yeah.
That's why I was smiling at the start of that story, because I knew there was a happy ending, so I wouldn't have been quite so...
And she's brilliant, and she let me put her story in the book and checked it, which is good.
Yeah. Okay, and so that's kind of really interesting, because you're you're kind of adamant about the fact that this is not the right medium for every message.
Definitely.
So I want you to talk a little bit about that, like how you make strategic decisions on what to do. And you even go like into a lot of depth here, like about selecting the font, the design. It's all incredibly important.
Yeah, and it sounds, people laugh when you say that, but whether we like it or not, we are affected by aesthetics. So I started off doing craftivism, and when people wanted to join in, I started creating projects every month for people to meet up. And I quickly noticed that I was creating projects that weren't needed. I was focusing on the craft, and I was going, okay, I need to create something pretty and exciting and for people to do. It wasn't strategic in terms of what are we trying to change or challenge, who are we trying to target. So all of this has come from nearly 10 years of making lots of mistakes and honing my craft in what I do. But it does all make a difference. So I always try and challenge people to don't start with a love of craft. Actually, that could hinder what you're doing, because it could make you a bit more foggy, because if you just want to shoehorn your love of craft into something, it's the wrong order. We need to look at what's the cause, what's happening, and where are there gaps that we can be of use. So all of my projects are different for different objectives. So it might be that within a big campaign on climate change, there's brilliant marches happening, and that's really important. So there's amazing charities doing online petitions, but there's some people with lots of influence that aren't being targeted, or they're being targeted by an audience that they are not interested in, that aren't their customers, or that aren't influencing them. So we might make gifts for them. So
are you looking for the gaps initially?
Yes. Yeah.
So you're sort of doing like I'm not suggesting that you sit there and like plan all this out, but you're like mapping the activism that's already there, basically.
Yeah.
And then you're looking at the key players that are causing the problem, from shareholders of companies all the way through, and then you're thinking, where can we apply?
Mix. So like with the mini banners, I kept mini scrolls, the little shop dropping mini scrolls.
So cute.
So cute. That were in The Guardian, not through Lucy, thanks love, but wasn't through you, in The Guardian, Huffington Post. I don't run The Guardian, so there were sadly for London Fashion Week, and then it got into Parisian papers for Paris Fashion Week. With that idea, that came from me thinking about little mini scrolls, and wouldn't it be amazing if people opened them and there was a message, because there's a lot, again, in the book around using 2 senses or more. So if you're asking with the mini scrolls, it says, please open me, with a smiley face and a kiss, and it's on textured paper with embossed scissors, so you want to touch it, and it feels quite luxurious with purple rather than just cheap paper. And you have to decide, as someone that finds it in a shop pocket, because we shop drop, which is the reverse of shoplifting, and we put them in unethical shop pockets for people to find.
Oh, that's you, is it?
That's me. I literally did some 2 days ago in a big shop near Oxford Circus.
Have you ever stitched anything into a garment?
No, I haven't.
Oh,
that wasn't me.
Okay.
That wasn't me. But that was me thinking about little scrolls, little messages, how they're cute. Everything I do is quite mini, because I want to be small and beautiful. So with that, I thought this could be an interesting medium because it's interactive. Handwriting is really powerful for people because it's personal, and our brains work differently with handwriting because we're not used to it, lots of stuff. And then I thought, okay, that could work with the fashion industry, because there's a lot that we're doing to engage people on unethical fashion, but in terms of engaging people that love fashion, we're often quite demonizing of them. We judge them. It's not attractive to engage in the fashion revolution, really, because people who love fashion want to buy lots of clothes. I do. So we're sort of stopping people doing it. So I wanted to make something beautiful and engage them in a curious sense to say, who made your clothes? So with all of the projects, like with my hanky, it came from my MP not telling me to stop contacting her. So I made her a gift because I wanted to say, you might think that I'm a collectivist that just is sending you lots of petitions, which is why you've told me to stop sending you petitions.
Oh, they actually told you to cease and desist?
Yes. So sometimes it's done through problem solving. Sometimes it's an idea that just pops up in my head. But I'm very aware that I need to not shoehorn an idea into something and be really, I'm a devil's advocate for myself all the time, where I'm like, am I just shoehorning my love of mini scrolls into an issue, or could they be useful?
What sort of reception do they get, and what's been your best reaction? Like, has anybody that you might be in conflict with politically had a very generous response because they just love receiving something like this, which is really beautiful?
Yeah. Most I mean, a lot we do with MPs, but also power holders. They're people, which is a good reminder. Politicians especially. So I often speak to politician staff, sometimes by buying their alcohol in their House of Commons highly subsidised bar, by saying, if I buy you a drink, can you just tell me a bit about how it was useful, where we could have improved?
That age-old technique.
That age-old technique that works.
Yeah.
And what's amazing is stuff they told me that I hadn't thought about. So the fact that if you hand deliver something that you've handmade, it's really moving. You know, anytime you get a handmade gift, it is very moving. But if you make a handmade gift that's more about you want to show off your craft skill, or it's about you and your love of purple, and they might not like purple, then it's a bit like when your nan gives you a jumper that you don't really want. But also, the fact that it's handmade shows commitment as well. The more mistakes, the more endearing it is. And I've heard a lot of that from power holders who say, oh my word, the fact that it is wobbly and wibbly and not perfect just made it even more
Do you sometimes
emotional.
make it less perfect than it could be?
I'd like to say I do, but I learnt to craft from YouTube, so I'm not the best crafter at all. But also the fact that, so some politician staff say that, you know, after a long day for an MP that gets sent so many petition cards, so many emails saying do this, do this, do that, for any human being you just feel overwhelmed, don't you? And it's a bit of a boring job in lots of ways. So a lot of staff I've spoke to have said, you know, your little envelopes on mental health, I'll save it until 4 o'clock when my MP is a little bit grumpy or a little bit sad, and I'll say, look what we got today, Joe Blogs, do you like it? So not only does it perk them up, but also it's more memorable. They often show it on their pin boards or in the House of Commons to sort of compete with other politicians to say, look what my constituents have made me, which is great for us because it means they're reminded of the issue or reminded of us building a relationship with them. But also it makes them accountable. So all of the messaging we do is not, it is encouraging and positive, but it always makes them accountable. So it's not so fluffy that we're not saying, what are you doing on this issue? But it's not so transactional that we say, are you doing this, yes or no? They can't, a lot of MP staff don't like me because they can't cut and paste an answer that they've already made for other petitions, because we purposefully have very open questions saying, we really care about this. What are you doing as part of the solution for it? We support Mind, the mental health charity, who believe that you should be doing this, this and this. Tell me what you're doing. What can I do? What do you think others can do? So that it does involve deep engagement from them.
Has anybody ever engaged to the extent that they've crafted something back? Like, I'm just imagining Jacob Rees-Mogg with his...
They're busy people, Lucy.
They're not that busy. They've got train journeys.
Depends which constituency they're in. Some are more busy than
I
others.
would be so tempted, because that would what would you do if you got a tapestry back from Boris Johnson or something?
To be honest, I'd tell him he wasn't a very strategic lobbyist, because it doesn't make sense for him to send me one back.
God knows what it would be of as well. That would be my slight worry with that. No, so you sort of define this as thing power. Like all of these objects have power in them.
Yeah.
It's just a kind of really kind of fascinating thing, because the more you look at them, the more I kind of understand them.
Focus. Stop just being...
I know, I'm sorry, because you can't see them.
Which is great, because if you use if you use 2 or more senses, so touch and looking at words, you remember it more. So the more people want to touch and feel what you've done, the more connection you've got, the more open people are to have a conversation with you than close off.
Okay, so these are all successful examples, these here. I want you to tell me about a complete disaster that hasn't got the desired response. Have you had anything that's just not really worked?
Like I was saying with the early days, where I was just creating new projects because I felt like, well, that is what people wanted. People came to our little meetings who wanted a new project, and I was just giving them what they wanted. And some of the projects were just awful, because I had a full-time job that I was working 80-hour weeks for, and then trying to create projects for people. So we made, years ago, little the women's symbol, little badges that we decided to give to men in the British Library, but we hadn't really come up with a clear message of why we were giving them to them. So some of the guys, bless them, on their own with their cup of tea and their book were like, why have you given me this? And we were like, because we've made it. So there wasn't like, it was about saying, if you're a feminist, it would be brilliant if you wore it to show that men are feminists too. We did use the suffragette colours because I love the suffragettes, but it made no sense to do it. And looking back, actually, it was a waste of resources that probably ended up in a landfill. So that is not good.
No, because guys in the British Library will be feminists anyway, and they wouldn't chuck it in a bin.
They were pretty awful.
Oh, really?
Quite quickly made. We had a certain amount of time.
I thought you meant the men in the British Library, not the badgers. They were awful.
No, so we were making stuff a couple of hours together.
Cheer up, love, it might never happen.
Rushing it. We're giving them these awful things that we'd made. Like, yeah. But that was me putting craft before activism.
Yeah, and you were starting. You was kind of starting
live and
out,
learn.
weren't you?
Yeah,
exactly. And it also it was something that you weren't able to do with confidence because you hadn't found your
and
feet.
Some of the messaging, like I did mini banners, was my first little one, which is quite a popular one for people. And some of the messaging was so vague. Yeah. Like I had one message that I thought was really profound and thoughtful, which was justice or just the way it is ? And I hung that up. What the hell does that mean? Absolutely nothing. I hung up near the South Bank, which has no context to that. Like, it was just stupid. It was a waste of resources. It was me trying to be clever, but it was far too vague. It didn't make any sense at all. I had a really nice picture done by a photographer because we work at an event there, but I'm never going to show that picture because it just makes no sense. Do you agree? It just doesn't.
Yeah,
does it?
I'm seeing that it could not work easily.
Didn't work.
What's a good message? What's a good tagline? I'm just looking at some of these. And how do you come up with these? Is this the hardest part to come out with with a message?
The message, I think, is the hardest. And for people, with the work I do, I attract a lot of introverts, shy people who are nervous of activism, sort of my little crew, burnt out activists as well, and people that love craft. And the messaging for everyone is the hardest bit, and we all want an easy way out. You don't want to think through it, but it is the hardest bit to really pull it apart. And in the book I talk about messaging and non-violent language and open and make it provocative, not preachy, and intriguing. And it is hard, and you could get paralysis through analysis of paralysis, paralysis of analysis.
Paralysis through analysis.
There we go, that one. I talk to people a lot about it. So again, it's all context by context. So I remember when there was there was the big crash, financial crash, and I lived near Bank Station. I was near Brick Lane in London, so a lot where the bankers were. And every day I was walking to Bank Tube Station to get into my job, surrounded by bankers. And I remember calling my mum saying, I want to put up a little banner, but I don't want them to, they were being called bankers or whatever a lot. And I thought, I don't want that, but I do want them thinking about how this is actually an opportunity for them to rethink the banking system and be part of the change. So me and my mum over the phone brainstormed what we could use. So we came up with a message about now is the time for unbridled capitalism to change into, I can't remember the exact quote, but to change into more ethical, equal capitalism, equal finance. So it was about now is the time for unbridled capitalism to turn into something brilliant, basically. And we wanted it for bankers to go, yeah, maybe we should change things. Maybe we have gone down the wrong road. And I put it up. It was taken down the next day. So someone grabbed it down, but I got a good picture. It was shared. It still gets shared a lot. It created a lot of conversation online of, let's see the crash. Yes, it's awful for a lot of people, but also what an amazing opportunity for us to say extreme capitalism does not work. Unbridled capitalism does not work. How can we be part of the solution? How can we ask bankers to be part of the solution? So that was about me walking to the tube every day. Sometimes it's me seeing an issue straight away and wanting to address it, but using little things so I'm not there. Sometimes it's reading the papers and wanting to challenge some of the immature ranting that people have and say, can we listen to each other please, and not just call each other the devil.
But then when you, like, have you ever read the Daily Mail? I mean, you just like have to produce like thousands per article, wouldn't you?
But again, that's the thing of that strategy that's important to say. You can't just do loads. If you rush it, you can see that it's rushed. Where are the gaps? So if there's already being done, if there's amazing stuff that's happening around a particular issue and your craftivism does not fit any gaps, don't do it. Look somewhere else.
And what are your issues? What are the ones that, what's your territory, I guess? It's
difficult because I started doing the projects because people wanted to join in, and now we've got people around the world. Not only have I got to think about what issues I care about, but also about providing projects and tools that other people can use globally within their context that works locally. So some of the projects are issue-based. Some of them, like the mini banners, are not. You put in whatever issue you care about, but you put it in, you hang it in an area that links to the issue, you take a good picture. Some of it, like the hearts on your sleeves, are on climate change, and we push people to use them at certain times of the year, but you can do it over the year. With the heart on your sleeve, it made sense because anyone can do it in the world. It's timeless. One of the things with craft that I think is really important is to make sure that your object doesn't go out of date quickly and does end up in a landfill, because I always get quite worried that I don't want to waste lots of resources that aren't recycled. All of the fabric we use is upcycled and donated by people, and the felt is made from post-consumer plastic bottles. But again, with craft, we've got to be aware of the physical resources we're using as well as the time.
But you can use, because of the small scale, you can use lots of offcuts, which would go into...
Which is brilliant. So a lot of the lovely patterned fabric I get are sleeves of shirts, because it's really hard to use them for other stuff, but for our banners, they work perfectly.
Can you do anything with tights? I know they're not the most beautiful fabric.
This is where you're shoehorning craft into activism, which is the wrong order.
I'm just desperate.
Yeah, but see what you've just done there?
Yeah,
you just
sorry. I apologise to everybody.
Has she read my book?
It was a low moment.
Has she really read my book?
It was a low moment. I was just desperate.
I get that all the time. Can you do something with this? So we do cotton because it's not stretchy, so it's easy to use. It's thin, so it frays, which actually makes it more delicate. People get a little bit more careful with it than if it was an object that you could yank and pull around, which again means people engage with it a little bit more softly than if it was like a big metal object. Because there's always words in what I do, because I think it's really hard to do activism with a clear message if words aren't involved, and often over a backstitch, so it's your own handwriting, which makes it personal. So there's lots of reasons why I use lots of yellows, as you can see everywhere.
You love yellow, don't you?
Because it's a very hopeful colour. Mm-hmm. It's a warm yellow, and orange is an active colour, but red is too bold. It can overwhelm people. It's very angry or active colour. Whereas, so if I used everything that was black and red, you'd have a very different feel to the table than the fact that it's very kitsch. And it's kitsch because it attracts people to it, that then you can challenge them with a protest.
I'm going to be greedy and ask you 2 more questions, but get ready if you've got any questions, because we've got a bit of time, so this is good. So I want to ask you, have you ever seen any of this stuff on eBay? And if you haven't, when that happens, how are you going to feel?
I haven't yet. So I don't put up any of our street art in East London because it gets yanked away very quickly, because people do think it might be worth something.
That's hipsters for you.
That's hipsters for you. But also, what's the point in putting it there? This is me learning from my mistakes. You're surrounded by graffiti, so you don't even notice it. So put it in South Kensington, and people are so scared of it, it stays up for months. It's my top tip. No, I haven't. I've seen lots of people create their own project of it, with the kits of it, but I haven't seen people sell them. I used to make I'm a Craftivist badge. You know, you've got I'm a Craftivist, because I do have a lot of people saying, can I just buy one off you and not make it myself? I'd be like, you're a craftivist.
But I'll sell it to you.
But I have never sold a piece to anyone.
Never.
I have been offered lots of money,
bet.
and I haven't sold any because I want them to make it.
Yeah. I commend you for that. And I want to ask you about attention and coverage from the media. So this little scroll, this was in The Guardian.
Mm-hmm.
Do you feel like you get enough coverage? Does anyone ever feel like they get enough coverage? But do you feel well loved by the media generally?
So with magazines, so lots of craft magazines, arts and fashion magazines are amazing now and really very open to actually coming to me saying, can you do stuff for our readers? But they also have lots of advertisers. So I have to work with them quite carefully to not make it so specific to a company that advertises or might advertise in their company so that it can reach a big audience. So it's a constant tension between, I don't want to dilute the activism so it's just a bit of fluff that doesn't really say anything. But also I'm very aware that if it's too focused on a particular political party or a particular company, they won't cover it. So, but magazines are often really brilliant. Newspapers tend to want something much simpler. They want, in one sentence, what is it? Very quick. They want quick responses. But again, often, I think they're getting more nervous now. I don't know whether you'd agree. And in terms of papers need lots of advertising, need lots of money. So over the years, I've had journalists be much more sensitive around, I'm not sure we can say the company's name, or we're going to cover that project over there from you, but we can't cover this one where you're targeting a particular company because it's just too, they won't advertise with us anymore.
Is that what they've specifically said?
Yeah.
I would have said that it's often a legal issue.
Yeah.
So
that as well.
If you're
I'm very careful with that.
I think you are. I think you've got more careful.
Yes.
But I think that, we have to be careful with company names and unsubstantiated claims that we haven't checked out. So it can be less of a direct advertising issue, and it can be because we don't have as many staff as we used to. So actually putting in the legwork to do all the back checking would be really difficult for something that's a very visual, immediate hit. Yeah. So it's a difficult story.
Most of my projects that are issue based, I link it with a well-respected charity so that everything is legit, because I don't have the time either to do all the research. But also, because a lot of media are now on social media, my question for you is, how much does that impact whether they go for, if we go for this bit of craftivism, we'll get more likes than if we go for this one that might be more political with a capital P. Is that something that the media think about now? I don't know, because I think a lot of mainstream media probably is not that good at social media. So I think in terms of like... But maybe clicks, in terms of clickbait of articles as well. I think, to be completely frank, this is not the sort of clickbait. This is not clickbait territory ever. But some of it has been in terms of like the pussy hats has been something that a lot of media covered because it was a very... Yeah, because it's a massive visual story. But I think that's probably a fairly standalone story from the, craft movement in the last sort of, 50 years. But I think, once you've got... And that's almost like a sort of flash mob story in a way. But I think, for Instagram and stuff like that, you've obviously got an immense power now because what you're doing is so visual. It is visual, but it's still, I know that I could get more shares and likes and stuff if I made it much less opinionated and challenging, because I am, the messages are challenging to us as readers and makers to say, what are you doing on this issue? And you've read this, but now I want you to take this action in whatever way. It's not affirmational stuff. It's not, if I cross-stitched make tea, not war, I know that would be shared way more than a lot of the stuff I do. How and I'm sure you agree. Well, but it does get more shares. But I just think it's too vague. Yeah, or something about clean eating or yoga or something. Yeah, it'd probably be all over the place. Or if I did a voodoo doll of a particular politician that everyone hates at the moment, we'll get loads of shares, and you'd probably get certain online websites that would love to share it. Now, I'm not going to do that because I think focusing on people's personality rather than their policy is just discredits you as an activist, makes you look childish, a bit stupid, actually helps the other side look stronger. So I'm not going to do it. But it would make me feel nice for a quick while. It would get lots of likes. A lot of people would remember it and probably say, oh, you did that voodoo doll. But I'm not going to do it.
It's interesting, isn't it? And I think as you know, Instagram I find fascinating.
I love Instagram.
I do love it and I loathe it in equal measure. And I'm relatively new to it, but I don't know how everybody feels about it. But it can seem that content is so secondary. And I'm a content person, you know, I'm a writer. I've never been particularly visual, so it's a big adjustment for me. And I think in terms of if there's a science to it, I was on holiday with my mate who's a journalist and she's quite active on Instagram. And she's doing a piece on when people leave her Instagram, what sort of pictures make them leave.
Yeah.
And it was quite funny because she did a bikini shot and she lost loads of followers.
Really?
Which was really, really bizarre. It was really strange. It's a very, very odd thing. It's a very, very odd thing, which I can't entirely work out yet. Anyway, let's see if anyone's got any questions. Does anyone have any questions? Oh, amazing. Yeah, straight away.
Oh, yeah.
Can I pass these round?
Yeah, definitely.
I'm going to count them out, so make sure they come back, because I'll be counting them in.
So one of the banner, we got a nice timeless message on one banner that says, it's not only what we do that we're held responsible, but also for what we don't do. So, and often the banners are very different. So sometimes it's a fact that's quite a shocking fact. So again, around London Fashion Week, it's in my mind because it was recent. I did a banner that said that models in London Fashion Week get paid on average £210, was it? An hour. And factory workers in Vietnam get paid 21p. And I just put, is this fair? ? Now, in lots of ways, it is, because freelancers, you need to be paid more. It's cheaper to live in Vietnam. So the reason I put that quote wasn't for people to go, of course it's not, and then forget that they've just agreed with something and spoon feed them information. And I put a little badge on from a charity about love fashion, hate sweatshops from War on Want, so you could find out more information. And we took a really good picture of it in Somerset House with all the fashionistas walking past, because that's their hub for London Fashion Week. So sometimes it's facts, but never telling you what to think. Sometimes it's questions. Sometimes it's statements like this. But wherever you put it has an impact. So this one about responsibility, I would probably, this was an example I take to workshops, I'd probably put it somewhere with very influential people who work for a big organisation. I wouldn't put it outside a school, for example.
This is a J.K. Rowling one.
It is.
Did you speak to her about this? Does she know about it?
No.
Because she'll love it.
I don't even know how to engage with celebrities or
on Twitter. She's very active on Twitter.
I should, but I get it. I'm not very good at promoting stuff. It's a bit embarrassing. But I should send her a picture.
Can we send this?
So this one is a dot to dot, and it's letterpressed, and it says, it takes a great deal of bravery to stand up to our enemies, but just as much to stand up to our friends. And the point of these cards is for people that are so overwhelmed with injustice but don't know where to start. You pick one of 5 different change makers, and often people you don't expect. So very different from Abraham Lincoln, who was a very quiet but incredible president, to Eleanor Roosevelt, who just happened to be a president's wife and milked it for all she could, even though she was an introvert and had a column in the paper and got very nervous as a speaker but did loads of stuff, to show that activists and change makers are very different. But you keep that card as a physical reminder for you to say, I'm not going to be J.K. Rowling or Malala, but what context am I in? Where do I have influence? What gifts and talents and skills do I have that I can use? So very interactivism of that you keep. There's no point you giving that to someone. I don't think it'd have any major impact. So that's about interactivism.
Which is where we started, actually, when we were talking about why interactivism is important. Anybody else got anything that would... Yes, lady with scarf. I can't really see very well.
I was just going to ask, you talked about different crafts for different people. Is there any sort of gender bias? Is there any crafts that you think are more appealing to men than women?
I think, in my experience, the fact that giving gifts to power holders or for passers-by, the fact that it's thin and delicate and wiggles in the wind or is a bit frayed and you do hold it delicately, it doesn't I don't say this on camera, I don't love craft. I don't wear kitsch clothes. I'm attracted to this because it's cute and it's got words on, so you want to see what it says and you want to see what's on the back or if someone's made you a small object. I think it's powerful because of the sensors, because it's soft, because it's wobbly, because it's delicate, because the words are challenging but lovingly challenging, hopefully. So I don't think I think it's very different to giving someone a giant vase, for example, that you're scared you're going to break or that you have to have quite a skill to do. I learnt to craft from YouTube, very basic, within a few months. So, and also I talk to a lot of men who say, can I transfer this into my woodwork? And actually I say, if you made your MP a hanky, or whoever it is a hanky, rather than a sculptured piece of wood, it would be really powerful because they wouldn't expect a man to do it because of the gender element in it. So it would show more vulnerability. It would show that you're doing it for the cause and not because you love the craft. So I think for me, I really stick to handicraft again because of the repetitive action where you can think about the critical thinking and the crafter thoughts. All the elements for me is a bit like making a cake. I think it's probably the nicest cake rather than trying to do glass work with glass blow. And that, you know, I think you can't make something out of wood and think about social injustice because you might chop your finger off, but you can do some craft.
We don't advise that, by the way. There is a health and safety.
So you can do that repetitive action, which helps you think, which gives you the comfort of craft to ask these difficult, complex questions that you can't do with watercolour. I prefer painting, but I know that the craft is much more powerful than giving someone a painting, in my view.
Yes. Let's ask this gentleman here. Hello. What do you think of these pieces?
I think the gender question is really interesting. I'm thinking about it as you asked. I have to say, I do a lot of woodwork, which is very repetitive.
Yeah. But can you do it without thinking? Some of it you can.
Yeah, you're thinking, but you're thinking about the world and
Yeah.
the dog and the chickens as well as doing woodwork.
Oh, it sounds like you've got a lovely life. Could you pass that foot to this gentleman?
But it's a good question. So often I get men and women who respond differently. So when I gave my first hanky to my local MP to try and build a relationship with her, because she didn't clearly want one with me and thought I was this angry activist that was never... There was no point in her knowing. She immediately looked at the back, which made me think, oh, she might have crafted before. And she told me how she was still making a wedding present for her friend that was a cross-stitch, and her friend's wedding was 25 years ago. And we had a giggle. So it was a very different way of engaging with her. But when I've given it to board members, male board members in big suits, they still are really moved by it, not because of the object itself, but everything around it. So we talk about making sure that the gift is made so that you Google everything about them. So you make the gift in the colour that they wear mostly. You use a quote by someone that you think that they really like. So if they're a trustee of Kew Gardens, which one board member was, we put flowers everywhere and talked about flourishing. Another one was a trustee of the Royal Opera House, so we put a musician's quote on there about social change with music notes everywhere. So it didn't matter that he didn't like craft. What it showed was that we were thinking about him and how difficult his job was and how we didn't want him to blow his opportunity to use it well, which is why it was a good metaphor. So it was very much about us wanting to encourage him rather than, look how beautiful this is, it's in my favourite colour, I want to give you this. And I think the fact that it was humble and it was delicate and it can crease and be, can fall apart rather than a robust, hard object does engage all of us regardless of where we sit.
Well, let's see. What do you make of this?
Yeah.
What's your immediate response to the foot thing?
Yeah. Yeah, but in terms of if someone gave it to you, would it show you that they might care about an issue, and the fact that they're giving it to you in a bit of an embarrassing, like, I've made you this to show that I really want to engage with you, rather than I've made this thing that I want to show off to you. It's a... Like if I wheeled in a big rocking chair that I'd made you, the other thing is
I think you feel
different.
a bit obligated to...
But it does, so with a lot of politicians' staff that I speak to, they say, you know, if something's big, so a lot of the props they get given or the gifts they get given are really big, and they don't have space in their tiny constituency offices or their tiny rooms that they've got in Parliament.
We do this all the time. This is a show staple where you'll get a very kind of big celebrity on, and we'll have a woodworker. We had a guy who uses a chainsaw to carve stuff out of tree trunks, and he made something for whoever the guest was. I can't remember why he made it, and it was okay, but the guest clearly didn't want to take it with them to Los Angeles.
Yeah.
So it was a bit like...
So it's a functional thing as well. You know, the hanky you can put in your pocket, or you can pin it on your wall, or you can hide it in your bottom drawer. You know, there's different... It's also, again, it's always thinking about what will be useful for them rather than what do I want to do. Will it take up loads of space? Will it piss them off? You don't want to piss them off by giving them... I used to do it in the charity sector where we give giant engagement rings saying we're proposing to you that we want a climate bill that's very robust. You know, it's not a gift.
I love a pun, but
it's not a real
that's
gift.
Too much. No, it doesn't work. It doesn't work. Yeah, and also the people, you know, particularly high-profile people, they do weirdly get stuff in their own image quite a lot.
Yeah.
We famously, in our store cupboard, when we moved studios, we had a full-size statue of Phil Tufnell that I'm sure he won't mind me saying he didn't want.
Yeah.
So anyway, yes. Okay, so any more questions? Yes, lady in the black. Do you find it quite sort of gimmicky, that kind of... I'm
a bit cynical. So I do worry that it's them diverting our attention away from their processes to look at us, everyone else is doing it, we're going to follow the crowd of having lots of people that you don't normally as models, and it has nothing to do with their company, which in a lot of ways is great. But I also would love them to say, we're doing that, but also... we only use, you know, renewable energy in all of our factories.
So there'd be a change in their supply chain.
I just think we should all do it. You know, if any of us is saying, you know, you should do this, we need to look at ourselves first and say, have we done it? Because you don't have much credibility if you're telling other people to do what you're not doing. But at the same time, I have done it where I've contacted companies who've said we're going to make sure we get better maternity cover, or we're going to employ certain people that we're going to train up and stuff. And I've said, isn't that brilliant? That's so brilliant that you're doing this. It shows that you really want to pioneer in these ways. Can you tell me a bit more about this area that you haven't talked about for a while? Because that would also be brilliant. So I used it to sort of say, well done, but what about more? And I've done it with companies where they've improved on something, and then I've said, that's great, but what we really need is you to be accredited living wage employers, not just living wage employers, because without accreditation you could stay at that level and then you're not a living wage employer the next year, because year on year it needs to go up. So I tend to, wherever I can, start with the positives of you've done this, or you can do that, or you've got so much influence, or you've done stuff in the past, you could do it again, and build onto it. I often use that technique.
So you're raising the bar each time.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think also what's kind of interesting for me, especially with that example that you give, is I'm always interested in the originators of these ideas. So with Craftivists, I know something about you, and now we know more about you because of the book, and we know about how you generate the ideas, and we know that it's an authentic idea. Sometimes I worry with some of these big brand ideas that they, you know, sit in a meeting and they're all wearing like hats and stuff, and you know, and they're all going...
Or they just get an agency to do it.
Well, in an agency, and they go, oh, how can we be really woke today? And then a man shouts leg hair, and then it's how it, you know...
But
so
you saw that with the Pepsi advert. Did you see the
Pepsi advert? Was a disaster.
Do you remember that
so
one?
describe a little bit what happened.
So did you see recently, was it in the Super Bowl? So one of the Kardashians, not that we follow the Kardashians, Lucy, the supermodel Kardashian, the younger one. So after all of the Black Lives Matter, where there was that incredible picture of a very beautiful black woman strongly standing against a whole row of white policemen in America, and it was shared everywhere. And Pepsi then did a very strange homage to it or something, where a supermodel stood in front of this row of police, opened a can of Pepsi and gave it to them.
It was possibly one of the misplaced things I've ever
was
seen.
Most,
I mean, it was such
really
cringe.
Bad taste.
You had to watch it from behind the sofa.
And what was it doing? It was selling a soft drink. It had nothing to do with an issue at all. It seemed very strange. But linking with that, one quick story. When I worked for Oxfam, we have target lists of which MPs to engage on different issues because they have more influence in certain areas than others. And there was one MP that for years our team was trying to engage with, and he was just ignoring everyone because they were like, do you care about this? No. Do you care about that? No. Everything was just his office saying, no, we don't really like you. We don't think aid is important either. And very strange, one of those. So I came in new with some, where I basically said, what's he done in the last few years as an MP that we thought was good? And it can be anything, just something that we can take hold of. And he'd voted on something that we'd agreed with. I think it was about maternal health. So we made him a card, a Valentine's Day card, saying, we love that you did that. That was brilliant. And we got the local WI group, because Women's Institute's very influential. Any Women's Institutes in here tonight? Whoop, whoop. Brilliant. We got them and said... We were working on this food justice campaign, and we said, we've given them this Valentine's card. We finally got the office who said, oh my word, thanks so much for this card.
No one's ever said we've done anything good.
So we said, we're working with the local WI, and knowing that most MPs are desperate to go to a WI and get a picture with you all.
Although terrified at the same
time. And we worked with the WI to give him a food hamper of ethical food and said, we really want food justice. And he said, of course I'm going to come to a WI. So we got a picture in his local paper with him in his column saying that he supports the Oxfam Grow campaign. And from then on, him and his team were much more open to work with us, because we just found something that we could link to.
I love the idea.
I made him a Valentine's card.
But it's really cute. I can just imagine you like sitting there going, there must be something that he's done.
But at the same time, my colleagues who I love, my ex-colleagues, were literally like, that is ridiculous. Why should we do that? Why are we going to make a Valentine's card for this politician? So I had to really plead my case to say, emotional intelligence, it makes sense in all these ways. He'll open up. We've got all this. And they were like, oh, just do what you want, but it's not going to work. And it worked. And now they've done it in other areas as well.
I bet they have. Yes. Any more questions? Yes.
Good question. And I think my last chapter is on measuring success, which I just think with activism is so hard, which is why a lot of us burn out, because you don't see success quickly. Or you're told you've had no impact when you have, or you've told you've had impact when you haven't. It's really hard to measure it all. So on different days, it's different. So we had one company who now pay the living wage to 50,000 staff, which for those 50,000 staff, for a lot of them, it was a huge impact. And we can claim that we've had part of that success because we were told directly by the board members, quite quietly. So that's amazing. But also, personally, a lot of the others are much harder, and that was quite unusual to have it so clear, because other organisations weren't doing lots of other stuff, so it was clear. Sometimes charities claim wins when we're just grasping at straws a little bit sometimes, or organisations do. I have a little little folder in my inbox. So anytime I get an email off someone or a group saying, I did this project and it made me use my money differently or move my money, or it helps me challenge a friend that said something racist, or we've set up a group in a different way, or I've gone on my first ever march, or anything I put in my happy folder, because so much of our work, as you'll know, is you don't quite know whether you're having an impact. And the problem with it is you are given space for people. I'm always, the mini scrolls, you don't know it's from us. It's there for people to read it, see that at Fashion Rev at the bottom, find out more about Fashion Revolution, think about who made their clothes. They're not going to know it's by us. They're not going to tell us. And I don't want them to tell us, because I want them going on their own journey. So I grasp at whatever I can get. And I think everyone should do that, but also see if something isn't working and you're not getting good feedback, then I need to change it. But so it's everything from, I had one girl who'd never been on a march before, and she made a green heart for her sleeve, and then got the courage to go on the climate march before the Paris COP one. We went on the London one, and she could see, she was very nervous, and she could see everyone, and I was with her and was like, it's all right. And now she's gone on more marches and she's got more involved. Some people who've made gifts for power holders that they've now got really good relationships with as critical friends rather than aggressive enemies. So it's all very different. The charity sector, who used to laugh at my work, now in the UK and further afield often say, we're going to implement some slow activism here because we know that's important. So it's hard to answer it, but for me it's personal as well as the big stuff.
I think it's really, I'm just going to chip in here, because I think when we talk,
sorry.
No, you're not. It's a great answer. But I think when you talk about having made changes to companies on living wage, I think that is so significant, because they had no intention. That was not in their plan ever. Like, it wasn't like, when we've made this amount of profit, we're going to give living wage.
They purposely avoided it.
Of course they did, because it's their business model is the opposite to that. So I think that is such a significant victory. It's just like unbelievable. The other thing that I want to say, just to keep it in perspective, is that this goes back to your media coverage and coverage generally, that I always know, having been around this area for a long time, that a lot of the big sort of celebrity campaigns in this area, and say ones that are televised and made into television series, they are picked because that area is about to go. Like, they know there's policy coming on board. They know
and they want a success story.
They want a success story. They're not going to take the money that it takes to put into a TV series, and this happens in the States a lot as well. If they're not going to be assured some sort of victory or some sort of announcement in Parliament or wherever at the end of it. So it's not quite, this is legitimate. What you're doing is legitimate, and that is much more choreographed.
I've got one success that I can't tell you about, of someone who works for a big, awful, dirty company that asked for help to have more renewables done by general managers around the world, renewable energy, get them on board with it. And it was very odd. It came through a friend of a friend to say, Sarah might be able to help with this. So we had all these phone meetings, all for free, so that there was no uncomfortable relationship with money involved. And I loved talking about what language to use, body language, how to make sure that they take ownership of it all. I can't say what it was, but I got a phone call off her saying we got more uptake of it than we ever have before. And this is an enormous company that can actually implement a lot of, they've got the money to do lots of clean energy, more than a lot of governments. And I can never say what that is or who it's with. And a lot of smaller meetings where I've helped make a change, where if I actually claim that I've been part of it, I'd lose those relationships. They might say, oh, you're doing it because you want to feel good, whereas I thought you were doing it to help me on the quiet. So there's also a lot of that I think is important to spot in, and organic ways. And
also, I would just make this point as well, that especially in the fashion industry, there is so much opportunity for change if you can just keep pushing.
Yeah.
And it does make such a massive difference, because there are things that I know are ready to go.
Yeah.
But as I say, it's not in the business model, it's not in the business plan, and it's purely to do with activism. So if you can be, it's almost like, those like slot machines where you keep putting the 2p's in and then it goes over. Even if you're that last 2p.
But also, it's knowing that as a craftivist, you're one of the 2 Ps. Yeah. But all the other stuff, you've got people at the UN doing stuff, you've got charity lobbyists, you've got journalists doing things, you've got secret meetings between friends that challenge each other. You have to see yourself as one of the many jigsaw pieces or one of the many objects that's helping with that tipping point. Yeah. Because it's very rare to be able to say, we did this and this happened, and it happened quickly. And often you end up going, something happens, it's a little win, and then you end up 5 steps back, and then you have to start it again. And you see that with, I always tell everyone to watch Selma, the Martin Luther King film, because it's so good at seeing strategy, seeing little wins and then it falling apart and then trying again and then going round with one ally and then seeing them as a blocker and having to go around the other way. And so it's very messy. It's not that attractive to be an activist, is it? It's really hard
Don't say
to get
that.
people
It's really
to be
great.
activists.
And yeah, it's really great. It's really easy. No,
really
we all know
easy.
that. We all know that. Any more questions? Yes.
Yeah, really good question. So can you be an effective craftivist and not take part in social media? Some craftivism I do, I purposely don't put on social media if it's more about relationship building or intimate activism by giving someone a gift, or my footprint that's in my room I don't share all of the time. That's my little interactivism object. Some of it, I think it is really good, and I think the fact that it's handmade means it does get shared more than like a still image from a brand that's made them. It means that more people see it. So I often take a photographer friend around with me because he takes much better pictures than me, and it also means that magazines and newspapers will share it as well as social media, and people regram it and retweet. So I do think I wouldn't be where I am without social media. I wouldn't have set up a group, but people found my little blog and wanted to join in. But Instagram and Pinterest didn't exist when I was started as a craftivist. Can you believe it?
Well, I won't tell you what existed when I started as a journalist.
So it depends what craftivism you do. And I think for you, it's saying, okay, if I'm not on them, where should I prioritise? Should I prioritise more of the intimate, quiet activism about relationships? Or if you've got a massive following on a certain social media, maybe it's your responsibility to focus on that area where you've got a bigger reach. And that's why everything's case by case, and why it was hard to write the book, because it's not, here's the instructions, go do it. It's who's in your circle of influence, where do you gain energy from, where are your talents, what country do you live in?
But that's such a good point as well, because if social media is going to zap your energy and stress you out, don't do it. It's not worth it. It's not worth it. I'm just going to take, yes. Yes.
Do you think they could have won the vote with a craftivist?
Yeah. Yeah, so I love the suffragettes, not because they slashed artwork and threw stones at windows and broke them all. I love one story where they would take golf balls out of politicians that were on a golf course. I thought that was hilarious. Just ruined the game and just wouldn't give them back without the vote. Literally would jump out of a bush, grab the golf ball and say, we'll give it back if you give us the vote. I just thought that was hilarious. What I loved about the suffragettes was they used branding really well. So I mentioned in the book about wearable activism and how they purposefully made sure that they wore very elegant outfits of women with the ruffles, and they had their purple, green and white that represented different meanings. So they knew that to have respect and to engage more women in what they were doing, they had to just look like normal women rather than this quite extreme group. But also remember, in the suffragettes there were divisions, there were very different groups. So some were very violent and said this is the only way, and some were very much like you're ruining it by being violent, and the same with Malcolm X and Martin Luther King. For me, looking at history, and I read lots of reports as well because I'm a big geek, I do believe at the end of the day that the non-violence is more powerful. Violence is a quick spotlight, but often it discredits people, and for power holders it's such an easy way to say we can't speak to those people, they're being far too violent. So and I'd challenge you on who got the vote. So if you read a lot of the context, women got the vote after the war because it was a lot about women were doing a lot of the jobs that the men were doing. So as well as having lots of extreme suffragettes in the papers and people being quite scared of them, and as well as having other suffragettes doing the non-violent stuff where you had the wives of politicians doing things, all of those different elements had an impact in different ways. But I think without the women taking on the men's roles, I think for me that was what I've seen. I think that was a really big tipping point.
Yeah, I think that's true. And I think that I'm also a history geek and I read a lot about this. I grew up partly in Ireland, in the Republic of Ireland, so the Home Rule Bill, and there's some sort of linkage between the Home Rule Bill and women's suffrage, and in terms of the political machinations that were going on at the time. And I think that, yes, there were a lot of deals done which were not part of the violent protest. Would we still be talking about the suffragettes if we hadn't had those extreme examples?
And the images that we
and also
see,
the absolute courage
Yeah.
and the heroicism
Yeah.
of those women. You know, would young women today be seeing those images if they had just kind of politically manoeuvred their way into suffrage, which probably ultimately the balance comes down that that's what happened. So there's other facets that are given by extreme protesting, what we might call extreme protesting.
And you see it now as well. So you have some campaign organisations that will do really well at big stunts that will annoy big companies and politicians, but they will very cleverly tell other organisations that do non-violence and have relationships with power holders, they'll tell them beforehand and say, we're going to do this big thing about fracking. We're not going to be able to have a conversation with them because they're just going to be annoyed by us. So we're going to tell you in advance so that you can gather up all of the reports to say it's in the paper and you need to give a reply. We could help you with that reply. So you have different groups that actually on the quiet behind the scenes know the strengths and weaknesses of each other, and done well. Again, it's that melting pot and looking at the activism toolkit and saying, where is there a gap? I think there's a massive gap where there isn't slow activism for us to stop and reflect and not just act out of anger, which isn't very strategic. And I think there is a need for us to build relationships with power holders as well as do big stunts that get in the media quickly for urgent policy changes.
Yeah, and also you can change your tactics, because if they're not listening to you and they are running rings around you and they are actively pretending that there's change when there isn't change, then you do have to ramp things up. There's no question, really. But I think, have you seen the new Al Gore film, the sequel?
I haven't yet. Is it good?
I thought it was really, really interesting, but it's so strategic. Like, a lot of people will be quite bored because it's actually
sounds amazing. I want to go now.
You're going to love it. You're going to love it. There's quite a lot of chatting. You know, you see the back channeling and you see how it actually works. And the decisive shift, I don't think this is a spoiler because it's not really that kind of a film, but the decisive shift comes when Al Gore goes to the Indian government, who is saying, we will not stop putting in coal-fired power stations. How much money do you need? What price would you buy solar energy at? And then makes a few phone calls. So it's actually like quite boring in the general scheme of things.
A lot of activism is boring.
Yeah, it's doing the numbers.
Yeah.
What is it that you want? And it's negotiation, and it's not really difficult. Different
and I
to
think
political
the
negotiation.
strength with the craftivism is it's a catalyst, not a conclusion. It's the start of something, or it's a little nudge for something. But you do need boring meetings. You do need to find out who else is involved to say, you're really good at the number crunching. I'm doing this, can you make sure you've got everything ready to go do that? I do a lot of stuff where I sniff around people. I've done it with you. Where I've gone
sniffing around me for ages. I've actually got an injunction.
Where I've gone, do you happen to know the chair of this sustainability voluntary board for this company? Because we've got a blocker with the head of sustainability here, and I really need a new ally because our ally's just retired. So I do it a lot with people. Do you know this person? Do you know that person? Can I just feed you some information? And again, there's no sewing involved, sadly.
I got to sit next to Billie Jean King yesterday on the show, and in between films, I said to her, my mother fought for equal pay in 1971.
Amazing.
Well, she didn't get it, and I haven't got it. You know, and she...
Not now with the big... It was all in the papers.
Well, there's a long way to go, let's put it that way. There are battles that are obviously continuing generation after generation. And she was very frank. She said to me, you need, when you're doing these campaigns, you need the men in the organisation to support your campaign.
Yeah.
Which I was surprised, I thought she was going to say, right, let's barricade the... But it's, it was a very strategic position that she took. So, there are lots of different ways of... And I believe what she says. She knows about this stuff. She's fought a few battles in her time. Okay, I'm going to take some more rapid-fire questions because we're going to run out of time. How fabulous.
I'm loving this audience, though. Thanks for your questions.
And
so
we also
far.
want you to be able to sign some books, Sarah. So, yes. Dungarees.
Requires like resources, and it also requires a social construct that makes you feel like the things that you put out there are going to be heard.
Mm-hmm.
I just wondered what your thoughts were on craftivism and how it can help those who are the most marginalised in society, who don't engage in activism because there is a feeling that no one's going to listen to them anyway.
Yeah, and it's really hard. I know as a crafter, it does cost money, so you get a certain type of audience that can come along. My workshops today weren't free because I have to make all the kits and they're all ethically made, so they're much more expensive than if they were unethically made. But also I'm from a very low income area that still is a very deprived area, and I get really annoyed when people say, you're the marginalised people, you fix the system because you're directly affected. So you're living on the breadline, you're having to go through a lot of stuff that's being hit your way. To say to people who are struggling, you also need to fix it, I think which some people do, I think is really problematic because you're exhausted and you're just trying to survive. So I think for me with craftivism, and I talk a lot, my mum's best friend is one of my absolute sheroes. And whenever I have a wobble thinking, what am I doing? I'm cross-stitching with a group of women in Surrey at a WI, and I love them to bits, and this is brilliant. But I also am from an area that's massively cut by austerity, and we've got kids eating wallpaper because they're hungry and their parents can't give them more food, so they're eating it on the sly to feel full because they don't want their parents to know that they're still hungry. And so I speak to my mum's friend, and she's like, right, we're doing what we can here. Tell me what you're doing. I say, is this dignified for you, Anne? Do you think this is helpful in that? Looking at that jigsaw map, if I'm doing stuff with these women or if I'm engaging these customers, it links in with yours, but is there anything I can do your end? So I'm always very aware of not making our activism about us saving people and not saying marginalised people should do everything. I don't work with marginalised groups because I actually think that the strength in craftivism is that I get to reach groups that don't engage in activism even though they've often got time and resources to do it. So I think for me, because there's only one of me, my priority is to reach audiences that are hard to reach but very politically influential. And rightly or wrongly, if you're not directly affected by an injustice, those in power, and you show that you care about that injustice, those in power are really scared because they think, why do you care? You're not directly affected, so if you care, maybe other people care. So I target people that don't need to care and say, look, all of these people care because I know that has an impact. But I also make sure that I'm not oversimplifying things, demonizing people, labeling them, victimizing them. And because I'm from a low-income area where we were labeled locally as well as nationally growing up and still now, I'm very sensitive around that. So, and I've got enough people in Everton that would tell me if I was saying something awful or using the wrong word. And like, I never talk about the poor or the rich. I don't label people who live in poverty, people who happen to be rich. I'm very careful about that. So, but it's a really important question, and I don't want people feeling like they can't get involved. But it comes down to strategy. Is who's your audience? Who are you trying to engage? Who do they listen to? How can craft be used? Sometimes craft, you mentioned this about it being good for community cohesion or community arts projects. But if we're talking about national or international changes of policies and stuff. That's very different to a community arts project. So I think we also need to be really clear on what's what and not label everything as craftivism if it's actually not. And I do a lot of easier way to doing it from a blank canvas is I mostly link in with other organisations. So I did a thing with the V&A for Refugee Week where we got 150 people to do a project with luggage tags about journeys and about refugees and put yourself in their shoes and what can we do as a country. And I spoke to Refugee Action and said, what are you doing? I've got this idea. The brief is that I've only got an afternoon. We've got a budget of this. It's got to be drop-in. So all of those objectives I had to reach. But how can this complement your work and help people then hopefully support your work, whether it's in terms of campaigning or donation or whatever. So I made sure that, because they're the experts in this, that we work together for them to say, yeah, the wording's right, we'll give you all the facts, which we know because we've researched them. We're doing all this stuff for people on the ground. And what was lovely was I sent them all the pictures at the end and they shared it with some of their local groups that they're doing a lot of work with. And they loved the fact that people in the V&A were doing this thing, using some of the stories. And the same with people in Everton. My mum, bless her, always takes prints off images of some of the stuff I'm doing about inequality and shows people in Everton. So they go, oh, go ahead, Sarah, you're doing your bit. Even though I ran away to London, which...
That's unforgivable.
It is a bit.
I really like the idea as well that you can work with people who have not accessed some of these stories before, because people are told that austerity is not causing a problem, and they may read a newspaper and they may have a group of friends that reinforce that idea. So suddenly being confronted with a story or with somebody's narrative is pretty powerful. They're not going to forget that. They're not going to forget that malnutrition we saw pre-austerity we thought had gone and is now back again in schools, in school children.
Yeah.
They're not going to forget that stuff. Okay, any more questions?
And we are led by emotions more than facts, whether we like it or not.
Well, I
so
certainly
we do
am.
need to engage people in both.
Any more? Yes.
Ooh,
Where would their energies be best channeled? This is the last point, by the way, because it's
I do this well-making clinic where I do one-to-ones for people. So this doesn't answer your question, because I'd go, okay, where's your circle of influence? Where have you got time and energy? What can you... So I'd be wanting to find out from you where you're best placed. But in general, I do a lot on the fashion industry, because I genuinely think that businesses can change things much quicker than governments. The turnaround isn't as quick, so CEOs tend to stay in positions for many years and decades more than politicians. PR means that they're more fragile, so you can get more of an impact. You might disagree with me, but I think there's a lot that the fashion industry can do, and they're are they the third biggest industry in the world?
There's something in the top 5. We can never quite know exactly where they sit.
Bazillions. It's billions of pounds that
well,
are
the
part
global
of
fashion industry
is
is something like $3 trillion, and it's in the top 5 polluters, so that includes oil.
But
petrol.
If you cut it all down, you've got all these things that I think they could tweak and change. So I focus a lot on that, because people can grasp it a lot and go, okay, well, what about who is it made by? How is it made? So I think, and we all wear clothes, so I think we can all look and go, who made my clothes, and find out. And as consumers, we can say, even if we can't afford more ethical clothes, we can say, as a consumer, dear cheap fashion brand, I want you to improve the way your clothes are made, and it costs an extra couple of pence, not a lot. So that's a big one for me. More generally, my big thing is inequality. So where I see mass inequality, whether it's financial or whether it's a class system or a privilege or race or any inequality where people are being treated differently, I think on every level we should challenge that, whether it's someone at a bus stop treating your friend differently to you and pulling them up on it, going, what? How come you spoke to her and not me? So I think, and on a global level, inequality is just getting bigger and worse. And then the third one, none of us can ignore, is global warming. And I hate the fact that we call it climate change, because the Bush administration created climate change as a phrase. Did you know that?
Well, yeah, there's all sorts of problems with global warming as well, because Margaret Thatcher slightly created global warming. So.
But global warming sounds scary. Yeah, climate change doesn't sound scary, so I talk about global warming because it sounds a bit
and climate change is
scarier.
problematic for some people because the climate naturally
Always
changes.
Yeah. So those are for me: fashion industry, inequality at every level, whether it's in your school, your work, your friendship group, and climate change that we have to tackle.
I'm going to, can I chip in
You
here?
add in.
Because I'm basically like an agony aunt for the environment. That's my job in the newspaper. So I do get like, what can I do quickly? So the things I would say are change your bank account, switch your bank account, which no one ever thinks about. Like Triodos now do a current account, for example.
And they're setting up their own stores as well,
They
so
are.
you can actually walk in.
Yeah. And the advantage of that is that they don't just do negative screening, as in, no tobacco, no oil companies. They do positive screening. So they're actually investing in infrastructure and capital, and that's how we get the movement, that's how we get the energy. So switch your bank account, switch your energy provider.
Ecotricity are my favourite.
Ecotricity are my favourites
Are they?
too. Good, there's also Good Energy, but they are also investing in capacity building. So they're not just a green tariff, which they're mandated to do anyway by European law. They're actually adding to capacity.
And they make clean energy cheap for people on energy meters, rather than more expensive.
Yes,
which is
exactly.
Brilliant.
Yes.
Sorry, love.
No, and the third thing is just extremely simple, is if you wear an item of clothing for 9 months longer than you would ordinarily junk it, then that saves something like 30 to 40% of the carbon emissions. So it works out as a nice, quick, easy little thing to do. Oh, and fourth thing, if you could listen to Costing the Earth on Radio 4 on the 10th of October, so that's next week, isn't it? Is it 4 o'clock? I can't remember what time it's on. It'll be on iPlayer. It'll be on iPlayer for ages. But it's about the fashion industry. And the fifth thing, which is the most important thing.
How many things?
Is read this book. Purchase this book and read this book and act on this book, because I think it will change your life. I do. I honestly think it will change your life. I think the amplification outside and inside, making your voice stronger and your compassion deeper. Wasn't that the quote?
That was the quote. Well done. Look at you,
This is it.
bookending.
Look at this.
Told you she was good at her job. Full circle.
Way over time. You've only got 10 minutes to sign books now, so that's my fault. Not very professional. I want to thank you all for coming tonight. It's been a lovely, lovely, quite wide-ranging discussion, actually, but I really feel like I've met you properly, and it's really, really nice opportunity. And I want to say thank you to the gorgeous, brilliant Sarah Corbett.
And the amazing Lucy Siegle.